Good afternoon, my name is Will. I'm here with Sam and Sam, we have two Sams, and we call ourselves the Yellow Cake Boys, and I hope to make it clear to you why we call ourselves the Yellow Cake Boys a little later in the presentation, but I'll leave it as a mystery for now. We're going to talk a little bit about Nuclear Energy 101, and so all of us have sort of some experience in the nuclear energy world, and I want to try to convey to you why we're passionate about nuclear energy and why we think it's part of our future. So, to start off, why should you guys be interested, or why should you care about nuclear energy? I think the real reason you should care about it is because you're using it. Right now, we're using it to power our lights. We use it every day. We don't even think about it, because every day we're using electronic devices, or we're using iPhones or something like that we power up, plug into the wall, we don't even think about it. So if you're like me, or if you're like a lot of people who might have an iPhone or some sort of phone or something that you use, and you start off your morning, and your battery looks sort of like this. And then by now, your batteries start to look a little more like this. It's a little later in the day. By the time you leave here today, you may have a battery that looks like this, especially if you're texting while I'm talking. So, by the time your battery gets to this point, you're probably looking around for a power outlet to plug your phone into. But if you're like me, you don't even really think about it. You just plug your phone in, you don't really think about where electricity comes from. I feel like a lot of people, including myself included for a long time, didn't even give any thought to where electricity comes from. It's just sort of an invisible thing we take for granted. So to start off our presentation, I want to talk a little bit about where does our electricity come from. So the vast majority of electricity in the U.S. and around the world comes from a place that looks like this. So this is a power plant. In this case, it's a coal-burning power plant. And there's a couple key features I want to point out. You can see them in the lighting. First thing you'll see at any one of these power plants, we have hundreds of these in the United States, is this combustion chamber. This is not the coolest looking building, but it houses a bunch of gigantic furnaces in it that are used to burn coal or natural gas or some sort of fuel. Another key feature you'll notice are these gigantic chimneys. We call them flume stacks. These are chimneys that are used to direct the smoke that's emitted when we burn fuel in our combustion. Third key feature, a lot of people don't realize, when you see one of these gigantic stacks, like you're driving down the interstate or something like that, you see one of these gigantic stacks, you tend to think that that's a nuclear power plant. That's not the case at all. That has nothing to do with nuclear energy at all, actually. These are called cooling towers, and if you ever get a chance to go up inside one and look at what's happening, if you walk into the bottom, you look up, you see a gigantic circular waterfall. Essentially, what these are used for is to cool the water that's being boiled in the combustion chamber. So nuclear power plants certainly do use these, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but when you see this isn't a nuclear reactor itself, it's a cooling tower. So those are a couple key features of a power plant. You've got the flume stacks, the cooling towers, and a combustion boiler. And another thing that you can't see in this picture is the fuel trains. So all these power plants are burning or using some sort of fuel. In this case, it's a coal-burning power plant. You have about 3 of these 100-car trains of fuel that service a typical coal-burning power plant every week. 3 of these trains, about 300 car train loads worth of fuel coming in every week to fuel this particular power plant. So that's a lot of fuel. So that's a typical power plant. That's where most of our electricity comes from. I'll get into nuclear specifically here in a moment. Before I do that, I want to talk about what is the basic recipe for electricity. You have this gigantic power plant. What's actually going on here? Well, at the end of the day, I like to think of making electricity as sort of putting together a recipe. And there really is a recipe for electricity. There's only a couple key ingredients that we really need to produce electricity that's at its most fundamental level. The first key ingredient, as you can see here, is you need some sort of heat source. From the beginning of time, or the beginning of our time as a species, we've been burning things to produce energy. And at the end of the day, we're still burning a lot of stuff to produce energy. So you need some sort of heat source. The next ingredient for producing electricity, you need to channel that heat into water, or into something that you can, where you can store that energy. In the case of most power plants, you channel it to water, you produce steam. And that steam you allow it to build up. And in this case, you're seeing steam coming from a geyser in Yellowstone National Park. This just showcases the power of steam. We produce a lot of steam at these power plants, and that steam is used to drive these gigantic turbines. It causes we let the steam build up, and it allows these turbines to rotate and produce electricity. So that's the 4th main ingredient for the vast majority of electricity that's produced in the United States. heat source, boiling water, lots of steam, and gigantic steam turbines. So if that's the recipe for electricity, how do you, and that's the recipe that's being cooked at these power plants, how do they get the electricity to you, to me, how do they get it to the MIT museum so that you can watch this power plant? The way that we get it to our homes and our communities is through the electric power plants. We have a massive system of high tension power cables that crisscross the United States to transport electricity from these power plants of various sorts to our homes, to our communities. So that's electricity as a whole. That's the recipe for cooking electricity. What about nuclear power? How does nuclear power play into this? So at the end of the day, when I first started my PhD at MIT, during orientation, one of the professors at MIT broke down, I feel like he did a really good job at breaking down what nuclear energy is at its most fundamental. And he told us that at the end of the day, all nuclear energy is, it's just some hot rocks. We've just learned how, as humans, we've learned how to make very special hot rocks and use that as our energy source instead of burning coal or natural gas or wood or something along those lines. So, what do we make those hot rocks out of? So you may have seen this in school, you may have seen this on science videos of some sort. This is called the periodic table of elements. This is used to categorize all of the fundamental building blocks that we see in nature. And on the bottom you'll see that we have a lot of the heaviest atoms that are known to man. And in particular, when we build our special hot rocks for the reactor, we're looking at a couple of the key heavy elements. These heavy elements are composed of lots of neutrons and protons. There's so many of those neutrons and protons that they become unstable. And there's a couple key elements that we're curious about, or that we're particularly interested in when we make our fuel for nuclear reactors. The first one, probably you may have heard about it, it's called uranium. Another one that you may have heard of is called plutonium. And the third one, which has been used and may be used in the future, not necessarily in the US, but in China or India, maybe in the US, is called thorium. It's also very promising. So these are three of the key ingredients that we're interested in as nuclear engineers in building and making our hot rocks to produce electricity. So, those are the elements. What do those elements look like when you dig them out of the ground? Well, around the world there are a number of different mines where we mine uranium. And when we pull it out of the ground, it looks something like this. This is called yellow cake. This is why we call ourselves the yellow cake boys, because uranium, when you pull it out of the ground before you start fabricating it into nuclear fuel, uranium oxide has this yellowish color, and it's called yellow cake. And as you guys can enjoy after the program, we have some actual yellow cake you can eat. And if your question is how much of this yellow cake do you need to power all of your electronic devices, everything you use for your entire lifetime, it's about 3 small pieces of cake. That's all the uranium you need for the entire, all of this that you need for your entire life. So about that much. So anyway, you can grab a piece of cake, eat your entire energy footprint for your entire lifetime. Like on your way out, we have some cake over here on the side. So anyway, this is what we use as sort of like the building block for our hot rocks. Uranium yellow cake. Okay, now, so what is like some of the basic physics? What are we actually doing? What's actually going on in these hot rocks? So the fundamental idea that the fundamental thing that we care about is what's called nuclear fission. It's the nuclear reaction that we're particularly interested in here. And what happens is you get this gigantic uranium or plutonium or thorium nucleus. It's got protons and neutrons that comprise the nucleus. And it's unstable, but it's not quite unstable enough to give us energy. We have to give it a little bit of a nudge. And the nudge that we give it in nuclear reactors is what's called a neutron. We have to have an extra neutron that comes in, hits this nucleus, and it gets absorbed. It forms an unstable uranium-236, what we call compound nucleus. It's unstable, and it splits apart to form 2 brand new atoms, or nuclei in this case, krypton and barium. They form a variety of different other byproducts. But in any case, this nucleus splits apart into 2 new nuclei, and it emits a couple extra neutrons, in addition to releasing a lot of energy, a lot. And what's really cool is that you can use those extra neutrons that are emitted to create a chain reaction. So in a nuclear reactor, that's what we're doing essentially, is we're trying to create this chain reaction and make it self-sustaining such that it can continue on its own and produce a lot of energy for us. So with that, I am going to switch over and allow Sam to give you a little bit of his experience in the nuclear world. Thanks, Bill.
So I wanted to switch gears here a little bit. You got a little sneak preview. I want to talk about something actually related to nuclear power. I want to talk about Elvis. I want to talk about the state of Alaska. And I want to talk about Bobby Fischer. So what do these things have to do with nuclear power? In 1958, Elvis joined the Army. Alaska became a state, and Bobby Fischer became the youngest Grand Master at the age of 14. But most importantly, in 1958, the USS Nautilus completed the first submerged circumnavigation of the North Pole. This is only possible because it did so on nuclear power. Think about it, it traveled from Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, all the way up to the North Pole, went around the North Pole, and then came back to Greenland without coming up once the entire time. And it did so only because it didn't require diesel power or any other source of propulsion. It did so on nuclear power. And the reason I tell you this is not only because that's really cool, and it did so on nuclear power. That was in 1958. I'll then just go out on a ledge here and say most of us weren't alive at that point. And so this technology has been proven to be reliable and safe for a long period of time. This here is the crew of the USS Nevada in 2003. This is a US Navy nuclear-powered submarine. And I'm showing you this picture for two reasons. The first is that this is a crew of about 150 people. The vast majority of these people never got a college education. They came into the Navy straight from high school. Yet the Navy has taught them how to safely operate a reactor for extended periods of time, and they've been able to do so safely. Also, the second reason I tell you this is because that's me right there. So I have 10,000 hours of experience operating a critical nuclear reactor. I'm an economics major. No significant technical background. But within about a year and a half, Navy taught me the basics of nuclear engineering. It taught me about propulsion, and it made me safe and capable of operating a reactor. I did that for 10,000 hours. The most danger I ever got into during that entire time was spilling hot coffee on my lap. So it can truly be done safely and effectively. Okay, so other people have concerns about the radiation side. And I'm here to personally attest to you that it is safe from a radiation perspective. When I left the nuclear Navy in 2008, this was my lifetime dose, 127 milligrams. So that doesn't mean a lot to most of you, and I understand that. So I want to put that into perspective for you. So here's one of my colleagues in the Navy. He's a pilot. You can make some guesses about what his dose would be over 10,000 hours. I'll just go ahead and tell you. It's about 7,000 milligrams from naturally occurring sources of radiation. Because pilots operate at a much higher altitude, they're exposed to much more cosmic radiation than we are normally during the day. I tell you this not to tell you that this pilot receives an unsafe dose of radiation. He receives a completely safe dose of radiation. We never think twice about it. But if you put things into context, I got a lot less radiation than this pilot did. But we don't consider his job to be hazardous from that respect. Okay, and the reason we don't consider his job to be hazardous from a radiation point of view is because there are naturally occurring sources of radiation. So I had a banana this morning. I probably had about, on average, a banana every day my entire life. During my lifespan, I had received as much radiation from the potassium inside a banana as I did while I was operating nuclear reactors or a submarine. You also get radiation from, from their solar cosmic radiation that you get sitting on the beach. As we talked about, when you fly in an airplane, you get additional radiation from the sun and from cosmic sources. There's even radiation in our smoke detectors. Americium is in there, and it's used to detect smoke, and these are things that save our lives on a daily basis. So radiation's all around us. It's something to be afraid of at natural doses. It's something that's naturally occurring. It's just as natural as gravity. Okay, so going back to the Navy context, the actual first commercial reactor in the United States was in the 1950s, and it was actually based on that first Navy reactor design. It makes a lot of sense. It's a reliable design. It can be used effectively on a large scale, and so this is very similar to what we use today and to what was on that first nuclear-powered submarine, the USS Nautilus, back in 1958. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Sam Shaner.
All right, thank you, Sam. And now I'm going to go into showing a few nuclear reactors that we have today that are producing energy, and also space reactors. So this is a picture of what a nuclear power plant would look like. Everything here would be the same for a natural gas fired power plant or a coal power plant. The only difference is in this power plant we have the uranium fuel and nuclear reactor that's used to produce the heat. But everything else, the generator, the cooling towers, is all the same as another power plant. And this is a picture of an actual nuclear power plant in the central coast of California, about 15 miles from where I grew up and where my neighbors work at. And you can see the two circular domes. Those are where two reactors are. They produce about 1 gigawatt of electricity each. And then they just heat up water from the Pacific Ocean instead of having the cooling towers. And this provides enough energy for something like 1 million homes or a few million homes in California. And then this is another picture of a power plant. This one has the cooling towers that you saw before. Here are the reactors, and there are the cooling towers. Just another example. I think this is one from the Midwest. And then what do we do with the waste that comes out of the reactor? In the U.S., we actually keep it on site at all the plants. And we just have a lot of these nuclear fuel assemblies or bundles, like this example we have over here, stay in the reactor for about 5 years. When we take them out, we put them in these big swimming pools, basically, where they can cool down for a number of years. Usually, I think they do like up to 30 years in some of the plants now, and it produces this nice blue glow. So currently, we have a lot of these pools at every reactor, store the fuel. Then after a while, we just take it out and put it in these large cement casks basically in the parking lot and use this for interim storage in the U.S. The strategy is ultimately to develop a geological repository for this. Is more than sufficient means to store the nuclear waste. And the long-term waste disposal, some of you have heard of Yucca Mountain. This is a picture of it, located in Nevada. And this is where they see the fuel being stored long-term, and this is where we're proposing. Another option is deep borehole disposal, where you basically drill a big hole in the ground in a very geologically stable area. And we have a lot of experience with this from petroleum industry, where we drill holes in the ground to get oil. It's the same concept where we just put the spent fuel down in the hole. And another option, stuff that some people are looking at M.I.T. and in industry, is actually taking the waste from a nuclear reactor. We only actually burn about 5% of the energy in the fuel, and then putting it in these types of reactors that actually take it and burn the waste and get essentially more energy and don't produce any extra waste. So how much waste is there? As Sam mentioned earlier, our first nuclear power plants came online in the late 50s, early 60s. We used to produce about 20% of our electricity ever since then. But if we took all that waste from 20% of our electricity for the past 5 or 6 decades and put it on this football field here at K12 Stadium, it would be a block about this big. Not really all that much. It's just 100 yards long by a little over 50 yards wide, and the height of this block would only be about 7 yards. So it's really not much waste, and enough that we can contain it in this insurance storage. And if you said, well, I want to replace all those nuclear power plants with coal or natural gas, how much waste would you produce from that? It ends up being about hundreds of millions to a billion of these stadiums filled all the way with CO2, mercury, and the other things that it does. So quite a bit more if we want to replace all of our nuclear energy with another energy source. Now we're going to look at a few other reactor types. We've flown a few reactors in space, and this is the Voyager 1 aircraft, the first spacecraft that is the first man-made object that's left our solar system. And this has a nuclear reactor located on it. It's used to produce about 400 watts of electricity for the past 35 years, and will continue to do so for the next decade. And it just has about 100 kilograms of material that's used to power the satellite and send signals back to Earth. Another example is the Mars Curiosity rover. There have been a few rovers that we sent to Mars. The Curiosity is one of the first ones to have nuclear power, and it has a nuclear reactor located in it that's used to produce all the power for its scientific instruments and for communication. It allows it to operate all the time, even when you have like attention on the planet at night. And then there have been some other concepts that we proposed that we've tested. Nuclear propulsion here on Earth. It's basically a large nuclear reactor that we use to heat up hydrogen and to send satellites and different things into space. It's a very exciting reactor. It's pretty small, but produces the same amount of energy as one of the large power plants that we have for a few seconds. The other one is for long-term, long lifetime nuclear power for space exploration. So say if we want to go to Mars, we look at having a reactor like this, produce power for decades and power manned spacecraft. And the kind of reason that I think this is really interesting is right now we're considering going to Mars. And if we want to go to Mars,